is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank my good friend from Georgia for yielding me the time to go forward with discussion of this particular rule. The rule provides for consideration of both H.R. 3578, which is referred to as the Baseline Reform Act, and H.R. 3582, the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act. Both of these bills, in my opinion, impose convoluted new rules on an already complicated budget process and attempt to enshrine the majority's ideology into what is supposed to be an objective analysis. What my friends on the Republican side are presenting as common sense reforms are actually, in my opinion, nonsense reforms. These budget process changes are mere gimmicks to defend the elimination of spending on essential government services and to dress up tax cuts for those in our society who are well off in the phony disguise of benefiting average Americans. These changes tie Congress and the Congressional Budget Office up in knots in an effort to prove that conservative ideology about taxes and spending is going to grow our nation's economy, not creating more jobs, not stimulating demand, not investing in infrastructure or education or any of the many endeavors that are critical to improving the lives of all Americans. Rather, what my friends, the Republicans, are trying to do is, in my opinion, create a Frankenstein budget process. And a procedure here, add a little bit of a procedure, sever a rule over there, zap it with some electricity or hyperbole, and now you have a budget process that proves tax cuts for the wealthiest among us are the only way to grow our economy. But guess what? It still ain't human, and it certainly isn't humane. For the Baseline Reform Act, Mr. Speaker, Republicans propose that the Congressional Budget Office not include annual inflation when making their budget estimates. When I was a child, 10 and 11 years old, we didn't get radio programs very much, but we got radio programs on Saturday. And one of the programs that I enjoyed so much as a little boy, sitting on the rug in the living room listening to, was Let's Pretend. And I never did know then that I would be here in this august institution sitting around with people who are pretending in the budget process that inflation doesn't exist when they're making budget estimates. I talked yesterday, and one of my friends on the Rules Committee had been down in Florida and knew I had a major water issue at my home in Florida. And so for the last 2 or 3 months, my water bill has been exorbitant, and I couldn't figure out why. And I ultimately, this morning, I learned for the first time that there's a substantial leak inside the house, and so the plumbers are there. I'm already out more than $1,000, and later on I'm going to be voting about my salary. Yesterday I voted about the cost of living for federal employees, and I think we do them a terrible disservice by disallowing them the kinds of increases that take into consideration the exact same kind of thing that I and other members of this House and people throughout this nation are experiencing when it comes to their personal undertakings. We've been without an increase here, and yes, this nation is in serious trouble, and the people that we tend to attack are the people that are at the lowest end of the scale, and the middle class people, the police officers, the firefighters, the school teachers who make 35, 40, one or two of them luckily make $60,000 a year, and what we wind up doing is taking them to task. They have the same plumbing problems that I do. There is inflation, and you can't do a budget without contemplating it, but if you wish to pretend, then I guess that's what we will do is play let's pretend. This seems like a rather mundane technical change, but it isn't. I'd be pleased to support this, Mr. Speaker, because it means that in making my own personal budget or projections, I could have just simply ignored the fact that costs for everyday items, and I don't know a single thing that I bought in the last 3 years that has gone down in price. I just simply ignore the fact that costs for everyday items and activities tend to go up every year, indeed every month. And around this place, if you're looking at the local gas stations, every day, every week. I can just assume that I'm paying today, if I wanted to, I guess, and keep paying 10 years from now and still expect the exact same amount of goods and services. But of course, we all know that that isn't true. Simply wishing away or pretending that inflation away won't make it so. Fuzzy math does not equal fiscal responsibility. By eliminating inflation adjustments from discretionary spending projections, my friends, the Republicans are actually just reducing the funding for a federal program. Since the dollar amount would stay the same every year, the amount of services that could be covered would decrease. I this morning had the good fortune of having a fine group of safety patrol students from Pleasant City Elementary School in Palm Beach County in West Palm Beach in the office, and I was talking with them about the fact that I would be here discussing the budget and how everything affects their lives as well as the lives of all American citizens around this country. And if we were to allow this budget process to take place, all we will have is a continuing decrease over the long term, and things that I may wish for those children at Pleasant City Elementary School or at Cove Elementary. Their counselor was here, and we were discussing the number of teachers that have been laid off and the number of music programs that no longer exist. So let's just pretend that they don't cost but the same thing at one time, and you'll find over the long haul that you'll get these decreases, and that will result in massive decreases in essential services like fire services and police services and school teachers that millions, indeed all Americans, rely on. This technical change, then, is actually a backdoor effort to slowly starve necessary government programs rather than be upfront which programs Republicans want to eliminate. The celebrated conservative Grover Norquist made it very clear. H.R. 3578 says that every year, every program and agency should be assumed to get smaller and smaller automatically. I refer to Mr. Norquist as an ideologue. He said, I'm not in favor of abolishing government, and I'm quoting him, I just want to shrink it down to the size where we can drown it in a bathtub. I somehow or another am at odds with that kind of thinking when we're about the business of having more people, as I explained, to the children that are in the category of the neediest, and here we are protecting the greediest in our society. This technical change, then, is actually a backdoor effort to slowly starve necessary government programs rather than be upfront about which programs Republicans want to eliminate. They would rather put sneaky rules into place to guarantee the outcome they want without having to have an open debate. That's the kind of budget process that only Igor, the Frankenstein monster, could love. Through the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act, Mr. Speaker, Republicans want to introduce dynamic scoring to the CBO's projection process. Once again, this seems like a minor technical change, but when you look closely, you see that this is an effort to zap electricity into Igor the monster budget that is tax cuts in the final analysis for those of us in the society that are better off and the wealthier or even among that class. Under this bill, the CBO's analysis are tweaked so that tax cuts for the wealthy seem like they grow the economy, while actual investments in the needs of everyday Americans do not. Republicans make it easier to cut taxes for those of us that are well off and those of us that are rich than to build bridges and schools for the rest of us. This bill specifically instructs the CBO to ignore the positive economic effects that will come about from investment in things like infrastructure and education, as if spending on things that Americans want and need won't boost the economy, they would have us pretend. The CBO has already projected that extending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest among us would actually reduce growth in the long run. But rather than face the facts, Republicans simply want to change the rules so that this analysis is turned upside down. My friends on the Republican side have been so concerned about building actual bridges to nowhere, they've turned the budget process into its own kind of bridge to nowhere, rather than using the budget process to lead this country into a new era of economic growth. My friends on the other side of the aisle want to cut taxes for very wealthy people, cut programs for everyone else, and then feel like they've set this country on the right track. This is no way to run an economy, no way to run a budget process, and no way to stick up for millions of struggling Americans who need us to focus on improving the economy. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.